I've spent the last 6 hours rerouting the manor's internal HVAC system, Finn said, a frantic, brilliant light in his eyes. And I've been mixing something in the chem lab. It's a concentrated identity blinder. If I pump it through the vents, anyone who doesn't have the Blackwood genetic marker in their system will lose their sense of smell and direction within 10 minutes. It'll turn the manor into a sensory vacuum for Silas and his goons. And us? Elias asked. Rowan is already struggling to breathe. We move him to the sub-basement sanctuary, Finn said. It's airtight. It has its own oxygen supply. But Castle, we can't keep running. If they breach the house, we have to end this. Castle looked at Rowan, who was curled in a ball, tears streaming down his face as another contraction racked his body. The youngest brother looked like a broken bird, but when he looked up at Castle, there was a spark of the old Blackwood fire in his eyes. Don't let him take me, Rowan whispered. I'd rather die in this house than live in his palace. Castle knelt beside the nest, his massive hand cupping Rowan's face. Nobody is dying today, Rowan, and nobody is taking you anywhere. Soren, call the council back. Tell them we accept the mediation on one condition. Silas Thorne enters this house alone. No guards, no peacekeepers, just the alpha in the pack. He'll never agree to that, Soren said. He will, Castle said, a dark, predatory smile crossing his face. Because I'm going to tell him that if he doesn't, I'm going to broadcast the recordings Finn found on Silas's private server. The ones where he discusses liquidating the Omega once the heir is born. Tell him it's a parley, or it's mutually assured destruction. The final descent. The house was prepped. The twins were pulled back from the woods to guard the basement door. Finn initiated the airtight seal. As the sound of helicopter rotors began to throb in the distance, shaking the very foundations of the ancient manor, Elias prepared a sedative for Rowan. I need you to sleep for the next hour, Ro, Elias said softly, his needle poised. When you wake up, the air will be clear. I promise. Castle. Rowan reached out, grabbing his eldest brother's sleeve. I'll be right outside the door, Rowan, Castle promised, his scent flaring to a warm, comforting cedar. He won't even hear your heartbeat. I'll be the only thing he sees. As Rowan drifted into a medically induced sleep, the first of the heavy helicopters hovered over the manor's stone roof. The hunt was over. The confrontation was here. The rotors of the council heavy-lift helicopter didn't just vibrate the air. They shook the very history out of the Blackwood Manor stone walls. Dust fell from the rafters of the great hall, dancing in the beams of the emergency red floodlights Finn had installed. Outside, the identity blinder gas, a thick, odorless mist, clung to the eaves of the house. To the peacekeepers hovering above, the manor looked like a tomb. To Silas Thorne, stepping onto the helipad Finn had remotely cleared on the roof, it looked like a cage he was about to break. Stay back, Silas commanded his lead security officer, his voice cutting through the howl of the wind. The Blackwoods are sentimental. If they see a uniform, they'll burn the house down with Rowan inside. If I go in alone, they'll try to talk. And while they talk, I'll take what's mine. Silas adjusted his cufflinks. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a charcoal wool overcoat and a look of cold, predatory certainty. He stepped in the rooftop access door, and the heavy iron clicked shut behind him. The labyrinth of senses. The interior of the manor was a sensory vacuum. Finn's airtight seal and the HVAC rerouting had stripped the air of all familiar scents. For an alpha like Silas, who relied on pheromonal cues to track and dominate, it was like being suddenly struck blind. He descended the stairs into the second-floor gallery. The silence was absolute, save for the distant, mechanical hum of the generators. Rowan, Silas called out. His voice didn't echo. The heavy tapestries Finn had hung dampened every vibration. Rowan, I know you can hear me. The council is waiting. If you walk out now, I'll tell them the Blackwoods coerced you. I'll spare your brothers the prison sentences. A low, melodic chuckle drifted from the shadows of the library. Soren stepped into the red light, leaning against a mahogany bookshelf. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid, looking as relaxed as if they were at a high society gala. Prison sentences, Silas? Soren asked, swirling the liquid. In which jurisdiction? The one where you authorize the illegal tracking of a founding line Omega? Or the one where you've been funneling Thorne estate funds into off-the-record alpha supremacy pacts? Silas stiffened. Blackmail is beneath you, Soren. Where's my mate? He's not your mate. A voice growled from the opposite side of the room. Jace and Kale emerged. They were stripped down to their tactical vests, their arms crossed. In the dim light, their identical faces looked like carved granite. They didn't smell like anything. Finn's neutralizer had wiped them clean, which made them even more terrifying. An alpha you can't scent is an alpha you can't predict. He's a Blackwood who made a mistake, Jace said. And we're the ones who fix mistakes, Kale finished. Silas lunged forward, his alpha command flared to its breaking point. Move! He roared, the sheer power of the vocalization enough to make a normal man's knees buckle. The twins didn't blink. They didn't even flinch. Save your breath, Silas. Finn's voice came over the intercom, echoing from every corner of the room at once. I've tuned the house's acoustics to cancel out your specific vocal frequency. To us, you just sound like a man shouting into a pillow. The Hollow King. Silas pushed past the twins, heading for the Great Hall. He was sweating now, the lack of sensory feedback making his pulse race. He burst through the double doors, expecting to find Rowan. Instead, he found Castle. The eldest Blackwood was sitting in a high-back chair at the end of the hall, directly in front of the heavy oak doors that led to the sub-basement. He looked like an ancient king on a throne of shadows. Sit down, Silas, Castle said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation to a funeral. Where is he? Silas demanded, his hand reaching into his coat. Not for a gun, but for the legal remand papers. He's sleeping, Castle said. For the first time in 4 months, his heart rate is below 100. His cortisol levels are stabilizing. Do you know why? Because he can't smell you. He can't feel that jagged, parasitic bond you use to drain his spirit. I loved him, Silas snapped, though the words sounded like a lie even to him. You love the idea of him, Elias said, stepping out from behind Castle. The doctor looked tired, his surgical mask hanging around his neck. You loved that he was a Blackwood. You loved that his genetics would stabilize the Thorne line, which, according to the medical records Finn pulled from your family doctor, is suffering from alpha degeneration syndrome. You weren't looking for a mate. You were looking for a cure. The silence that followed was heavy. Silas's eyes darted around the room. He was surrounded. 5 brothers were in the room, and he knew the other 2 were guarding the doors. The Thorne line is the backbone of this territory, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. Without a healthy heir, the council falls. The economy collapses. I am doing what is necessary. You are doing what is selfish, Castle said, standing up. He was a head taller than Silas and twice as broad. And you're doing it to our blood. You thought because we lived in the woods, we'd forgotten how to fight. You thought we were just 7 brothers playing at being alphas. Castle took a step forward, his scent finally flaring. Not to dominate, but to crush. It was the smell of a landslide, of ancient trees falling, of the earth itself reclaiming what was stolen. We aren't just alphas, Silas, Castle growled, his hand gripping Silas's shoulder with enough force to bruise the bone. We are a pack, and a pack doesn't negotiate with parasites. A sharp, piercing alarm cut through the confrontation. Cass! Elias! Remy's voice screamed over the comms, high-pitched and terrified. The basement. Rowan, the monitor is flatlining. He's having a seizure. The bond sick fever hadn't been a phantom call from Silas. It had been the bond itself dying. Because Silas was physically in the house, the damaged tether between them had tried to reestablish itself with the force of a high-voltage wire. Rowan's body, already weakened by the pregnancy, was short-circuiting. Silas's face went pale. The air. Forget the air. Elias roared, sprinting toward the basement doors. Move, Silas. If he dies, I will kill you myself. The brothers scrambled, the tactical standoff forgotten in a heartbeat. They descended into the sub-basement, a sterile, white-tiled bunker. Rowan was thrashing on the bed, his back arched in a violent convulsion. Remy was trying to hold him down, tears streaming down his face. He's in bond shock, Elias yelled, grabbing a syringe of heavy sedative. Silas, get over here. Now. Silas stood frozen at the door. For all his talk of my mate and my heir, he looked at the sweating, suffering boy on the bed and felt nothing but fear. Not fear for Rowan, but fear of the failure. I can't, Silas stammered, backing away. The feedback, it'll damage my own core. I can't stabilize him. Castle looked at Silas, then at the dying boy on the bed. In that moment, the powerful alpha, Silas Thorne, shriveled into a coward. Remy, Soren, hold his legs. Castle commanded. Castle didn't wait for Elias's instructions. He climbed onto the narrow medical bed, pulling Rowan's convulsing body into his arms. He bared his own neck and pressed Rowan's face against his sink land. Elias, do it. Castle gritted out through clenched teeth. Castle, if you take the bond shot for him, it could burn out your alpha node, Elias warned, his hand trembling. You'll be a beta, or worse, for the rest of your life. He's my brother, Castle snarled. Do it. As Elias injected the stabilizer, a surge of raw, psychic energy ripped through the room. Rowan let out a final, soul-shattering scream and went limp. Castle slumped over him, blood trickling from his nose, his scent flickering like a dying candle. Silas stood in the doorway, watching the wreckage of the family he tried to destroy. He realized then that he hadn't just lost a mate. He had looked into the sun and realized he was made of wax. The aftermath of the breach. 10 minutes later, the peacekeepers breached the house. They found Silas Thorne sitting on the floor of the great hall, his head in his hands, his recovery warrant torn to shreds at his feet. In the basement, the heartbeat monitor began to pulse again. Thump, 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 thump. Rowan was alive. Castle was unconscious, his breathing shallow. The other 6 brothers stood in a circle around the bed, a wall of silent, bloody-minded protection that not even a god could break. Tell the council, Soren said to the lead peacekeeper, his voice cold and final, that Silas Thorne is no longer fit for office. And if he ever sets foot in this valley again, we won't call the lawyers. We'll call the twins. The snow had finally retreated from the Blackwood Valley, leaving behind the scent of damp earth, budding pine, and the relentless, quiet strength of a mountain waking up. Inside the manor, the red emergency lights were gone, replaced by the warm, amber glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the great hall. The master nest was no longer a war room bunker. It was a sanctuary of soft silks, hand-knitted blankets, and the peaceful, rhythmic breathing of a family that had survived the impossible. Rowan sat propped up against a mountain of pillows, his hand resting on the peak of his stomach. He was 8 months along now. The bond shock that had nearly killed him in Chapter 4 had left a faint, silvery scar across his scent gland, a phantom mark, but the jagged, parasitic pull of Silas Thorne was gone. In its place was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more powerful. He looked over at the armchair by the fire. Castle sat there, reading a leather-bound book. The eldest brother looked different. The terrifying, sharp edge of his alpha aura had softened. The sacrifice he had made, taking the brunt of Rowan's bond shock, had permanently dampened his alpha node. He was no longer the dominant predator of the valley. He was something the old books called a guardian alpha. His scent was less like a landslide and more like a steady, warming hearth. You're staring again, Ro, Castle said, not looking up from his book, though a small smile tugged at his lips. I'm just making sure you're real, Rowan whispered. Every morning I wake up and think I'm still back in the city, in that cold marble room. Castle closed the book and stood up. His movements were slower now, but his presence still filled the room with a sense of absolute safety. He walked over to the nest and sat on the edge, placing his large, calloused hand over Rowan's. The city is a memory, Castle said firmly. Silas is in a council-mandated rehabilitation colony for alpha degeneration. He'll never hold office again, and he'll never hold a claim over a Blackwood. You are free. The assembly of brothers. One by one, the other brothers drifted into the hall, drawn by the family frequency that always peaked in the late afternoon. Finn came in first, his eyes finally free of the dark circles of the siege. He was carrying a wooden mobile he had carved himself, tiny wolves and stars that moved with silent, perfect precision. He hung it above the center of the nest, his fingers lingering on Rowan's shoulder for a second. Jace and Kale followed, carrying a crate of fresh peaches from the lower orchard. They were laughing, a sound that had been absent for years. They had traded their tactical vests for flannel shirts, though they still scanned the tree line every time they passed a window. Old habits died hard. Soren arrived with a stack of legal documents, but instead of the grim expression he wore during the standoff, he looked triumphant. "It's done," he announced, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "The High Council has officially recognized the pack adoption clause. When the pup is born, their birth certificate will list the Blackwood Pack as the collective guardian. Silas has no legal path back, ever." Elias entered last, carrying a tray of tea and the prenatal vitamins he insisted Rowan take every day. He checked Rowan's pulse, nodding with satisfaction. "Heart rate is perfect. The pup is positioned. Any day now, little brother." Remy, who had been napping at the foot of the nest, sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Does that mean I can finally stop being the human heater?" "No," Rowan laughed, pulling Remy back down. "You're the softest. You're staying right here." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the room in shades of violet and gold, a sudden, sharp intake of breath from Rowan silenced the room. "Elias!" Rowan gasped, his hand gripping Castle's arm. It's time." The atmosphere shifted instantly. It wasn't the frantic panic of the night Silas breached the house. It was a coordinated, loving dance. The twins moved the furniture to create a wide, clear space. Finn dimmed the lights to a soft, natural glow. Soren brought in the ceremonial basin, filled with warm water and herbs from the valley. For the next 6 hours, the manor was filled with the sounds of labor, the low, grounding growls of the brothers, the soft murmurs of encouragement, and Rowan's rhythmic breathing. They didn't use a hospital bed. Rowan labored in the center of the nest, surrounded by the men who had risked everything to keep him. T2:14 a.m. A new sound pierced the silence of the Blackwood Valley. It was a sharp, healthy cry, a high-frequency note that vibrated through the hearts of every man in the room. Elias, his hands steady and eyes wet with tears, lifted the small, squirming bundle. "It's a boy," he whispered. "A healthy, perfect little alpha." He placed the baby directly onto Rowan's chest. Rowan let out a broken, joyous sob, his arms wrapping around the tiny life. The baby was covered in a fine down of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same deep, stormy gray as Castle's. "Look at him," Remy whispered, leaning over Rowan's shoulder. "He's beautiful." Then came the final scenting. One by one, the 7 brothers leaned in. Castle went first, pressing his forehead to the baby's, marking him with the scent of the protector. Elias marked him with the scent of health. Soren with the scent of wisdom. Finn with the scent of curiosity. Jace and Kale with the scent of courage. And Remy, with a kiss to the baby's forehead, marked him with the scent of love. The pup, who had been crying, suddenly went quiet. He inhaled deeply, his small chest rising and falling. He wasn't scenting one alpha. He was scenting a pack. He was scenting home. Months later, a visitor to the Blackwood Valley would see a strange and beautiful sight. Deep in the woods, far from the reach of the city's greed and the council's cold laws, a young Omega sat in a meadow of wildflowers. He was laughing as a toddler, fast and strong for his age, chased a large wolfhound through the tall grass. Nearby, 7 men were busy. Some were fixing the fence, some were tending the garden, and one was sitting on a porch, watching the horizon with a book in his lap. The baby, named Leo Blackwood, stopped running and looked back at the manor. He didn't know about Silas Thorne. He didn't know about recovery warrants or bond shocks. He only knew that whenever he fell, 7 pairs of hands were there to catch him. He knew that his father, Rowan, was the happiest person he had ever seen. As the moon rose over the valley, the 8 of them gathered on the porch. The master nest had been moved outside for the summer night. Rowan leaned his head against Castle's shoulder, watching the stars. He felt the phantom scar on his neck itch slightly, a reminder of the darkness he had escaped. But then he felt the warm weight of his son sleeping against his chest and the presence of his brothers all around him. The eighth sanctuary wasn't a house of stone or a fortress of guns. It was the bond between them, the unbreakable, seven-layered shield of a family that had chosen love over power. "We did it," Rowan whispered into the night. "No," Castle replied, pulling the blanket over the three of them. "We started it. This is just the beginning."